All right, everyone ready? Tyler will answer.
I'll start us off.
Let's do it.
When it comes to training your kids to obey you without question, are you also training them to obey all adults in their life without question? How do you teach kids obedience to authority, but also a healthy skepticism?
Excellent question. One thing that, so first of all, no, you are not teaching them to obey all adults. You are teaching them to obey appropriate authorities, and then it's your job to figure out, or to train them what authorities are appropriate. However, there is also, so something that we did was we require our children to say, yes sir, yes ma'am. One of the reasons we chose to have them say yes sir, yes ma'am instead of yes mama, yes papa is because we did want them to have a sense in which you are to respond to authority, and there are authorities other than mom and dad. So there's a gray area or wisdom in there. There are appropriate authorities you are requiring them to obey, but not all adults are legitimate authorities.
Well, and most of the authorities that they would obey are delegated authorities, right? Yeah. So it's teachers. Well, teachers are, I'm delegating some of my responsibility to them, that authority to them, those sorts of things.
That's huge. That's something I forgot to say before was, yes, the authority of the teacher is the authority of the father.
Yep.
So the teacher is wielding the father's authority. The teacher doesn't have the authority of their own, but it is true. It's truly the father's authority that they're wielding.
And that, maybe tag on from yesterday, that question, right? I don't know if we actually hit on it, but wives are called to submit to their husband, not to all men, just to one man.
Yeah. Right. So, and in some ways, a given woman would be unable to submit to a certain other man for obvious reasons, right? She could be far his superior in various ways. She's not called to submit to him. She's called to submit to her husband, to her head. And all other men, well, tough potatoes for them.
What else? Next.
Where do wives and mothers fall into discipline and education? Because I know, like you said, father's primary role for those things, but I mean, father's not always there, or maybe the father's not even in the picture, but like a woman's still trying to raise a godly household. But like, where do they fall in line? Because it seems like it's just a lot of like the father's job.
So two things there. Those are two separate questions. One is, what is the mother's role when there is a husband, and what is the mother's role when there's not? Right. So two separate things. When there is a husband, the reason why we are emphasizing that it is the father's role to educate is two reasons. One, because that's the language of Scripture, and also because of that covenantal understanding, right? That he is the head, and all things flow through him. But, right, the mother, the wife, wields his authority, and he's at work 9 to 5, right? And so she is going to be doing a lot of the practical training. What is she doing? She is exercising his authority, right? Maybe in a perfect, my wife and I have talked a little about this, maybe in a perfect world, I would do all the disciplining, right? If I were around all the time, maybe that would be more appropriate for me to do all of the spanking. Yeah, but that's just not practical. And so it's perfectly legitimate for her to wield my authority while I'm absent. And that's right and good.
When we're present, like in our home, from what you're saying, it sounds the same. If I'm home, I do all the discipline, right? Even if I was a part of that situation, I was out in the garage building something. My wife texts me and says, hey, Ev needs some spankings, or O needs some spankings, or something like that. And I come in and I handle that.
Yeah, and I think that's appropriate. The second question, what happens if the father's not in the picture? Well, then this is an irregular situation, a tragic situation, but in that sense, she has to fulfill the role as head. And so that's the way it goes. Good question.
What are your thoughts on using timeouts as a form of defellowship, since it's less of a one and done?
Yeah. Inferior. Yeah. Not unlawful. You can. You use all the tools in your toolbox, right? And there are sometimes, we were talking about this morning, particularly with daughters, right? Sometimes she is a puddle, and you cannot spank a puddle, right? She is out of control. She needs to be separated so that she can regain some self-control, and then we can continue the discussion. So I use timeouts as supplemental. and not a substitute, but perfectly lawful.
Yeah, same. And we actually make the distinction in those moments that you are choosing to continually stay out of fellowship, and so you are out of fellowship. When you're ready to come back in, we can have a discussion.
And we'll welcome you,
Exactly.
open arms. But yeah.
Yeah.
What is your guys' response to somebody who says, as choosing to homeschool your kids and your family, you're creating this, like you're placing them in a bubble, and you've got your like little Christian circle, and you're like trying to keep everybody out. What's your response to that?
First of all, that's true. There's a danger. Everything has its danger, right? And so the insular temptation to be like, it's our little compound, is absolutely one of the dangers of homeschooling. And so you don't have to say, no, that's not true. Like, no, that's absolutely possible. So that's why we're vigilantly avoiding it, right? The question of how to keep from simply having a feedback loop echo chamber is a live one. And I think there's lots of ways that it can be solved. Me personally, I was homeschooled, wonderful Christian household, and then when I was a sophomore in high school, I started taking an ROTC class at a local high school. And so I just was plunged into the public school. But I was plunged into the public school for 1 hour a day at 15. And so then I would come home and my parents and I would talk about everything. And so that was a wonderful way for me to have a strong foundation and then have a little bit of testing, right? And to be exposed to the outside world in a way that was really healthy for me. I think sports is another way that I've seen that done. So having your boys, especially if you choose to homeschool, having your boys go play on sports teams, right? It's a much smaller time commitment, right? So they're being exposed to negative influences far less. And also you're not giving this whole task of education to the coach, but they do get some external friction, which is good for the boys especially.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
At what point do you think they're ready to be out of that Christian bubble? Like more non-Christian spaces than Christian spaces? Is that college or?
Oh, I think that's, first of all, it varies a great deal. And I think it's very different for boys and girls. And I think that it's something that you do over time, slowly, right? So maybe you take them to T-ball, right? When they're 6, right? And they're going to be exposed to things at T-ball when they're 6. And you talk about them. And then maybe the next year you do T-ball and soccer, right? And so I don't think it's a hard and fast line. You're wanting to be giving them a full-orbed Christian education. And to think that has to be totally out of the world, Paul says that's ridiculous. But being wise and faithful in that.
Yeah, there's no tossing them to the wolves ever, really, right? What you're doing is you're slowly equipping them and building them. And I think one of the things I love about those later years of high school is you start challenging their foundations that you've built with atheistic questions and things that are hard. And it's like, okay, still in somewhat of a safe space, but we're interacting with external things. How do we reconcile this? How do we deal with this? And you're giving them tools to do that so that they're just naturally kind of moving into those spaces.
So what's your take on like Christian college versus public university?
I went to a Christian college, had a great experience. I was by no means isolated from the world and its influences at my Christian college, right? And you'd be very naive to think so. There is if you are going to college to continue your education, a true education is in subjection to Christ. And so why would I go and learn from the godless ones, right? But at the same time, you want them to be, even in college, you want them to be not simply in their little bubble anymore. You do want them to be going out and having adventures and slaying dragons. And hopefully by the time they're 18 and are out of your household, it's the... I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me, right? That kind of idea, right? They're dangerous to the world. And so the fact that they are then continuing their education in like-minded community, right, is fine. That's right and good. And I think that's a judgment call. But.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know if I have any major else to add.
Yeah, sir.
On this note, at what point do you think kids are able to be missionaries and be lights in the world, in our dark world.
Yeah.
So in the fullness of the darkness of this world, such as, I'm just coming from a perspective where I went to a public school all the time.
Yeah.
And I was taught, like, this is going to be hard, you're going to come back and talk to us,
Yeah.
go be a light. And so I guess I'm trying to understand your perspective
Yeah.
from having that perspective
Yeah,
of that level of influence.
The mission field is a war zone, right? There's a cosmic war going on. So at what point would I give my son a rifle and say, go for it, right? It's gonna be a while. They need to grow up into mature manhood before they're truly equipped to be a missionary or a combatant, right? There is the equipping phase. So I don't believe in the idea of sending children that are unequipped and untrained into dangerous spaces as missionaries. What you're basically doing is someone brought up, it's a child sacrifice. You're basically setting them up to be converted over into the enemy's camp. Which is why the stat I think you brought up earlier, where it's like 70, 80, 90% of Christian kids, when they go to college, they become pagans.
The numbers aren't good. Yeah.
Talking about discipline in public spaces,
Yeah.
and you mentioned you want to do that, you want to discipline your kids privately.
As much as possible.
How do you go about that when you're at the grocery store, one of your kids does something to warrant a spanking?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah, so we keep a spanking spoon in the car. And then when we discipline while at home, it gets rid of the tendency to throw fits and tantrums and things like that. So in a public setting, I can very easily do a slap on the hand, a flick on the mouth, even a smack on the back of the head, like, hey, shape up, buddy, like, we're in public. Or if they really need a spanking, it's, okay, hey, when we get back to the car, we're gonna get disciplined. If Nicole and I are both there, then it's like, hey, I gotta take a kid out to the car, we're gonna go deal with this situation. But I don't think I've ever spanked in public. And I don't think you should.
Even if nothing else, for the dignity of the child.
Yeah.
Right. Which is real. They're a person.
Yeah.
Well, and part of it is just the function of spanking too, right? Like Josh was saying, you want skin. It needs to sting. And I'm not going to have my child pull his pants down in the middle of a grocery store.
Yeah. Right. So practical considerations. Yeah.
You guys kind of touched on a little bit of how you discipline or maybe parent boys and girls differently, and I'm specifically speaking about girls. They're more emotional, need a little bit maybe more connection. You mentioned
I have
a
noticed
funk.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a funk and all that stuff. Like, at what point do you kind of withhold a spanking versus just verbally talking to them as little girls who maybe need more like a connection type, if that makes sense?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, just because they need a connection doesn't mean they also don't need a spanking, right? And those don't have to be mutually exclusive. So I find that with disciplining my daughters, often the hugging, snuggling part is longer, right? And it's, for my boys, bear hug, off you go, right? For the girls, maybe we sit and I hold them for a while, right? And we talk about it, and I tell them that I love them, and I say, why do I spank you? Because I love you, right? And so I am establishing that connection. Now, differences between boys and girls, I will find that my daughters are more likely to just be emotionally all over the place. And at that time, is a spanking my most effective tool of instruction at this time, right? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And so sometimes I say, you are very weary, daughter, and we are going to lay you down for a nap, right?
And this is, like we talked about a little bit last night in marriage, right? Husbands bring protection to their wives through their stability to deal with that emotional all over the placeness. Fathers do the same thing for their daughters, right? They teach their daughters to find men that do that in doing those things. And so it's helping bring emotional stability, and sometimes that's a spanking, sometimes it's not. I say that theoretically because I know.
You know their frame, you remember that they are but dust.
Sorry if I missed this already, but what's like your progression to a spanking? Like warnings or a flick on the mouth or is there like a ramp up, I guess, to like, okay, this is now spanking?
Spanking is our go-to typically, right? Like Grace, abounds, love covers a multitude of sins, but we want to deal with it quickly. So there are certain things where we might be more lenient, but things like direct disobedience, rebellion, no. Like if you say the word no to a command immediate, we're going to be spanking, right? Like rebellion is not allowed or acceptable. So the default is a spanking. We progress to that point, maybe age-wise, right? So my 1-year-old right now, I'm not pulling his diaper off and spanking him on the butt yet. We're close to that phase, right? We usually get into it about a year and a half. We get to a good spot. But it's slaps on the hand, flicks on the mouth. So it's like it's a lesser spanking that they're growing up into a spanking.
With regards to warnings and those sorts of things, where we employ those is if there's any, we try to be gracious in like maybe they didn't hear me, right? Maybe let me be gentle and not trigger happy, right? Maybe they didn't hear me. Maybe they did not understand my command. Was I clear, right? But then if I know I was.
Yeah, that's the not provoking your children.
Yeah, right.
It's really understanding their frame. What were they doing? Was I loud enough? Those sorts of things.
You talked about varying forms of I forget, but like for a child, like I think of like me growing up, like I got swatted a few times when I was really little. I was like, wow, I don't really like.
I don't like that.
I don't like this very much, so I'm not gonna do. And like my family wasn't like a devout Christian household, but I was like, I don't like getting hit, so I'm gonna not do that. So I figured that out. My little brother though, just take a whooping and just continue to just be rebellious and stuff. And to this day, still just so it's just like different temperaments of child call for different levels of punishment. Like
yes,
okay.
sometimes, yeah.
Not necessarily different levels, but different
like is there like a standard?
Yeah.
But then it's like he's not learning after one. Like
we go back to deal with that situation
again.
And there are days when our boys get lots and lots of swats. Right? And there are stages of life as well where they're learning obedience more. And this is where, like, if you're in that sort of a phase, you need proactive discipline and reactive discipline. Right? And Josh was talking about that. But with Jelly Beans, like, let's practice obedience and go do a bunch of fun things, and then throw in every once in a while a thing that needs to be done. Like, oh, hey, okay, we did all these fun things. Now I need you to go pick up those toys and put them away. Yes, sir.
You're like, wait a second, this isn't a game anymore.
Yeah.
Like, yes, it is.
So that would be proactive, right? You're like, okay, I see that we're in a stage of life where we're needing to lean into these reactive training a bit more. So we're going to also do training on the positive side and enforce that discipline.
All kids are different.
Question.
I don't know if y'all mentioned this, but did y'all mention what age you start spanking? Because you said that you take the diaper off and bare skin. I can't imagine doing that with a 9-month-old. But
Usually at like a year and a half. 2 years.
And is there an age that you would stop spanking? Like a 17-year-old?
By 35, absolutely. So, in part, partly, like Tyler was saying, there's a gradation in the spanking. We have found that I have spanked an 8-month-old before. And what does spanking look like for an 8-month-old? It means a flick, right? And where do I see that? I don't just do it because I want to be mean. I do it when I see defiance. And they can be defiant on the changing table, right? And and you know it, right? You've changed enough diapers to go like, all right, this is a compliant child. Oh, no. You are angry at me. You are saying, not thy will, but mine be done, right? And I think that it's perfectly appropriate to give a flick at that point. And then but I would say it would be
flicks and swats in hand at 8, 9,
10 months. And then by about a year and a half is when we're graduating to wooden spoon. That's where my son is now. And we're about there. Yeah. And then as far as stopping spanking, ideally, you no longer have the need. Right? Ideally, they no longer require the spanking. And so the principle, I alluded to this, the principle that you should give 95% of your spankings by the time between the years 1 and 5. Right? And by the time they're 6, ideally you are spanking very rarely. And then you are reasoning with them more, you are explaining things more, you're using other forms of correction. And because what you're doing is you are training them, the next step you're training them in is to take responsibility, right? And to make things right.
To not need the correction to go make things right, but to take it on themselves. So,
But
I
it-
mean, my
yeah.
oldest will get one every once in a while.
Yeah, and I'll definitely still spank my 6-year-old on occasion. But yeah, if you wanted a number, 12, I don't know, 9,
10, 12.
10, 14. That was a joke. Yeah.
Could you guys expand on the idea of a garden of yes in your household, a limitation of rules, those kind of things?
Yeah.
It's a helpful
Yeah,
concept.
that is a good one. So what he's alluding to there is in the Garden of Eden, it was all yes, and there was one no, and the no was essential, but mostly it was joy. Mostly it was all things were allowed. There was one thing that was not allowed, and where that comes in is there could be a tendency in the part of parents to make lots and lots of unnecessary rules and give lots and lots of unnecessary commands. I do this all the time. And I've just been learning to repent of it. Like, I'll tell a kid no, and then I'll say, never mind, yes. I'm sorry that I said no. There was no reason for me to say no. You go, be blessed, right? And that's just, all right, I'm just learning. When I say no, I meant yes. And that is again, trying to cultivate joy in your home and blessing. And this is not a place where, when you're stepped out of line, where you're always in fear of being whacked. But no, you are seeking to honor your father and mother, and they have provided many good things for you, and there is a law for you to submit to, but it's all in the context of joy.
Yeah, same. Yeah, we kind of have 4 key rules in our house.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So, take responsibility, speak like a man, think before you do, clean up your messes. And that covers a lot of things, right? So it's easy to go back to those. What are our rules? What are our rules? Speak like a man. No grumbling, no complaining, no whining, no lying. It covers a lot. Clean up your messes. That's physical messes, emotional messes, interpersonal relationship messes. Right? Giving them principles to latch onto that they can build on as they grow.
Having a few key rules. I mean, again, we just do what God did. God gave 10 rules, and if you follow them completely, you'd be perfect, right? He summarized his law in 10 words, right? 10 commands. Okay, can you think of something similar? Could I?
Jesus even simplified it down to 2.
Wow, that was easy. Yeah, still hard to keep though.
Yes.
That could be a really practical tool.
This one's really for the small children, and as we're getting ready to have 2 kids, how do you handle tattling? I'm sure I could ask
yeah.
your sons this, and they would tell you. I'm sure every situation's different, but like, what's the general perspective on tattling?
Yeah, so I would go to Matthew 18, right? What I do is I say, well, have you talked to your brother about this first? Have you dealt with this in person before going to a higher authority and help encourage them and handle those things? Another really great thing I'm about to talk about stories. One of the things I love about Narnia is Aslan is constantly telling the children, that's not your story. Mind your own business is basically what he's saying. In 1 Thessalonians, it talks about living in a quiet way, minding your own business. And so what you have to do is you have to see what's the heart of the issue. Are they coming because of a genuine danger? They're trying to save their brother.
He has a hammer.
He's leaning on your top bump. He's gonna jump. Or is it a malicious intent to get the sibling in trouble? And if it is, well then I discipline the child. It's like, oh, okay. You're not seeking their good. You're seeking their ill. That's wicked. You have a hatred in your heart towards your brother. That's the other thing around discipline. You might have mentioned this, I might have missed it, but we use biblical language.
Yes.
Right? We
That's
clarify. You have hatred in your heart.
Yep.
That's wicked.
Using biblical language is really important. Right? You are being a fool. Right? You are not honoring God. You are being defiant.
You are grumbling, whining.
Right.
Like the Israelites. Go to an example. That's what
So you also use the word fellowship there.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. One last thing on the tattling. Again, I agree. Satan is the accuser, right? And so when a child is tattling for malicious intent, at least in your mind, and then when they get older, using that language, like you are being like Satan. He's the accuser, right? You're playing that part. That's not good, right? And distinguishing when a child comes with a true offense, like he really did do this, and it really was bad. I can separate, and I can acknowledge that was bad, and it was also bad for you to tell me like this, right? It's wrong. It's bad for your heart to do that.
How does the drunken destroyed. Do you have any advice along those lines for teaching boys to use that for good? And also, how to respond to bullies? Do we use it?
It's first of all, it sounds like you're doing all the right things, right? You are teaching them what is your strength for, and that's something I'll ask my boys. What is your strength for? My strength is to protect the weak, right? Okay, so if there's a dragon, what do? You kill it, right? Why? Because it's attacking the weak, right? And you've been given this strength. Use it. And then again, don't fight your brother. Fight you and your brother fight the dragon, right? And then of course there's contexts where I'm the dragon, right? And you have to fight me, right? That's entirely impossible, right? There have been a couple of times when when my son has gotten into scuffles just in kindergarten, right? And handling those is really interesting because I don't want him to think it's wrong to fight. I want him to think that there are wrong times and places to fight, right? And so sometimes we'll hash it out, and I'm like, all right, well, was it a fair fight? What was he doing? Right? Okay. Like, well, he was hitting me over and over again, so I pushed him down. Well, okay, actually, I am not mad. Right? Good work. Right? That was right.
And what was the lead up to the fight?
Right.
You interacting, trying to bring the situation down, handle it, and were they aggressive, or were you the aggressor? Those were
one thing that's wonderful about having daughters and sons is when my son is cruel to his sister, I can tell him, okay, what did you just do? I hit her with a stick. If someone else had hit your sister with a stick, what would I expect you to do? Oh, you'd expect me to take him down. Correct. I would. You were being the evil one that I would want you to take care of. Right?
We do that with little brothers too.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
So your job is to protect your little brother. And even with like Ezra's 3 and Malachi's 1, even between them, like you hurt your little brother, your job is to protect him. Be a good brother.
Know what your strength is for.
Yeah.
That's good.
This is kind of going back to yesterday, and this could probably be a whole other section, but marriage, we've got a lot of young marriages in here. How would you explain like biblical conflict and communication in marriage? Biblical conflict and communication. Tyler's ready to answer this question. Could you perhaps ask a slightly more specific question? Yeah, I guess just learning how to conflict with your spouse in a way that's loving and sacrificial.
Good. What happens to
Tools or
The husband needs to not lord over his wife and understand her frame. And the wife needs to submit to her husband and understand his role and his authority. Fundamentally, right? Like, I think a lot of conflicts could be resolved by those being deep-seated in the way that we interact. A lot of it's learning your spouse, understanding the rhythms, understanding the way your marriage works. But again, the goal is fellowship. Are we in fellowship as one, or are we out of fellowship, and how do you handle that?
Something that we didn't touch on as much last night as we could have is Ephesians 5, the instructions for husbands to love their wives and for wives to submit, to respect their husbands. So recognizing that in conflict there is, what is she still called to do? She's still called to respect him in the conflict. And
regardless of his respectability.
Yes. And everything in her probably will be bent against that, right? And he is called to love her tenderly and kindly and gently in the conflict, right? When he is bent away from that, right? But often the snarls get worse, and you can get into this cycle, right? Where, well, you disrespected me, and then you were very unloving, which made me very disrespectful, and then I was very unloving, and then, right, disaster. So recognizing that God has called us to relate to one another differently, right? And so I am called to love my wife in a way that is different from how she's called to love me. And it's all love, right? But I am called to be tender and kind and gentle, and she is called to give honor and respect.
And we're called into our weaknesses.
Because I am much more inclined to show honor, respect, right? The work rope, as opposed to giving the tender kindness. And she is much more inclined to be tender and kind and gentle, as opposed to giving honor and respect. I think that that's a fundamental principle that if grasped, can save your world of hurt.
continue it too, I have a question I was thinking about is how in parenting do you guys practically make time for your wives? Because like, I feel like we haven't touched on that side. It'd be cool to hear you guys talk about that.
How do you?
Yeah, post bedtime is awesome. We'll spend some time there. We do what's called late night, date night. Sitters are super cheap if they're not actually watching any kids. Right? It's like, hey, kids are in bed, they're asleep, you're here like just in case.
Yeah.
Do whatever you would do, just hang out. And then we can go and get drinks and dessert somewhere for a bit. That's been super helpful. Yeah.
But
It's
that
hard.
it's hard.
We were just talking, we have a trip planned in May, June for Nicole. And we have not had a day alone since Sawyer was born.
So your oldest.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. We went to Hawaii. Yeah,
You went
it
to
was
Hawaii.
it was between Sawyer and Everett.
Yeah.
We've not had a day alone, like an overnight day. And we're gonna be gone for a week. It's gonna be glorious. And I think Josh was saying the same thing. Like it'd been a while.
It had been since our oldest was born. I think we got away in August. Yeah. So that's illustrating that it's difficult.
It's difficult.
Not illustrating that it shouldn't be done.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's a good example.
It's or that we are good examples, right? But it is difficult. And that's something that needs to be leaned into and persevered in. Yeah.
And this is where the church can help, and this is where parents can help to carry some of that burden.
And as you're all young and have children around the same age, helping each other is really good.
Yeah.
So I've heard this mentality before of like, it's really important to prioritize your marriage in front of like the kids necessarily, and not to just like, not take care of them, but to prioritize that.
Yeah.
Does that kind of fall under like your showing them through action, like how they should be?
Yeah, and their confidence and solidity of their world is all defined by the marriage covenant, right? The family is defined by the marriage. And so if you were to care for your children and let your marriage fall apart, you didn't care for your children. Yeah. The same principle extends, right? You show hospitality to your family so that you can show hospitality to the wider. If you're not showing hospitality here, then you're not doing well out there. So the same thing applies to the covenant between the two of you. Can that be done well and poorly? Obviously, yes.
How do you guys navigate like babysitters? Because in everything that I hear you say, like consistency or discipline is
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah.
So like how do you guys navigate who watches your kids?
Yeah. Here's a silver bullet that we only just recently came to, and that is when you have a sitter, they are going to interact with your children and they won't be able to discipline them the way you can. You can't delegate that authority to them, at least not effectively. Here's what we came up with. We give the sitter a permanent marker. And we say, if a kid acts out, mark on the hand. I will attend to it when I come home. Right? And then the kid's like, oh no.
What have I done?
Oh no! Right? And it's always with them, right? And that way because what often happens is the sitter's like, well, you know, it wasn't that bad, and I don't want to, you know, and I forget to tell them, and then nothing really happens, right? But then when there's the black mark, right? Then the kid's like, I have done it, sir. I have sinned, right? And then I can say, all right, well, what happened? And I can attend to it. It's been an hour maybe, but they know. Yeah.
And does like the who matter? Like,
Oh, the who is your sitter?
Well, yeah. You answered my original question.
Okay.
Now I'm thinking about like how do you navigate the who?
Yeah, who watches your children? With extreme care and delicacy. And don't be dumb.
Prejudice.
Yeah. Being extremely selective on sitters, I think, is important.
Yeah.
And that's why having like-minded friends watching your kids can be helpful.
Any more?
I don't know if it's fully formed, but I'd love to hear your guys' take on as your families have grown, like how did that impact your church attendance or your childcare needs with coming to church? And like how do you feel supported? And just like I feel like we have a lot of families learning to navigate that for the very first time. So if you could kind of speak to how you guys did it or constantly do, that would be great.
Church attendance goes up and down as sickness comes, right? Like, if our kids are sick, then one of us will stay home with the kiddos, and the rest who are healthy will go still, right? Like, we don't have to all go together as a family unit. As many as possible go and attend. So it's not like this strict, we shall all go to church every Sunday of the year, and if we don't, we're in sin sort of thing. the childcare side of things, our situation is a little bit different than your guys', right? So we are family integrated in our worship. So my children sit with me through the entirety of the service. And so they're there, they're present. It's usually my wife with a baby, me with a baby, and then I have my 4 kids, youngest, 2 oldest, farthest away, next to me. And so I'm childcare. I'm weaning, I'm talking. And this is where family worship at home is really helpful because it's a training ground for the church service. Right? In family worship, I expect my boys to sit at attention and to be listening and engaging, not playing with toys or fiddling around with XYZ sort of thing. And so that I'd say is how we do childcare.
Like making time with your wife, it's hard work, and no one's saying it's not hard work. And so the hour that you're getting ready for church is hectic and zany, and that's right. There's no getting away from that. But the question is, what is church? Why are we going to church, right? Well, we're going to church to meet with God. Okay, well, if we're going to church to meet with God, then this is maybe definitely the most important thing we do all week. And so I am going to invest the energy and time and resources it takes to get us there and to make sure that we are fit for the presence of God. And yeah, it's hard work, and it's hard work as the kids have grown. And as there have been more and more kids, and then I'm often up front, and so my wife is in the row with 5 kids, and Lord bless her. And what happened? This was great. It's anecdotal, but I'm up there this last week, and all of a sudden there's a commotion, and I see the gentleman behind my family's row leaning forward, and he spends a long time helping something happen. And it turns out my son had fallen between the seats. And they just slip. This is my 1.5-year-old, and he'd fallen, and my wife's got a baby. And so what is she doing? So he helped her, and then at one point I saw my wife turn around and hand the baby off to his wife. And so there's the need for it to be a whole team effort. And sometimes, you're in and out a lot, giving swats to kids and making them fit for the presence of God. It's hard work.
Yeah, like one of the kind of comments that we'll get in our community is like, well, parents are distracted from the service. It's hard for them to pay attention, but the Lord takes pleasure in us disciplining our children in His presence, right? Taking them and handling that. And this is a work that He's tasked us to do alongside worship and glorifying Him.
And sure, does my experience in church suffer a little bit if I'm taking kids out all the time? Yeah, sure. And it's absolutely dwarfed by looking down and watching my son recite the Apostles' Creed. Exactly. Right? And you're like, oh, never mind, it was worth it. Yep. Yeah.
Was it difficult to get your guys' wives on the same page as you guys with spanking specifically? And how do you handle that if there's a disagreement in physical discipline?
Yeah. In short, it wasn't for us. It just wasn't. But the principle of loving, kind instruction from the husband to the wife is the key. Right?
Yeah, it comes down to like, what's your foundation in your marriage, right? Are we glorifying God in enjoyment? If we are, how do we glorify God in discipline? Well, then we go to the text, we go to Scripture, and again, like Josh taught us, Scripture is really clear. It's pretty direct. There's no real way around it without severe gymnastics. Yeah. So when we get there, it's like, okay, then the conversation really isn't whether we should or shouldn't be doing it, it's how. Yeah. And then that we've had spanking lessons, right? Where it's like
spanking lessons.
Those
are important.
Not a spanking, honey. You gotta work on this sort of thing. So that's helpful to help teach our wives. We had that,
and
how
also,
to spank and when to spank, and what rebellion looks like for boys and girls.
But also, I don't think it's what we just said was the husband needs to instruct the wife on how things should be. But also the wife is given to the husband, right, for counsel and for perspective. And the husband tends towards harshness, right? And so the softening effect of the wife's perspective, I think, is something that he also should take into consideration.
Yeah, and oftentimes that is like, are you sure he needs a spanking?
Yeah, right.
Did you ask what happens? Yeah. Like helpful reminders in those situations.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.